Good afternoon. Welcome to the FTD University webinar titled Hire Employees Every Day of Their Career. Today, you will learn how to create an experience for new employees that is memorable and can be replicated frequently. Glenna Hecht, President and Founder of Humanistic Consulting, will be leading this informative webinar. She is an accomplished international speaker, trainer, consultant, author, and certified senior professional in human resources. Glenna's experience spans more than 30 years as an executive leading HR and training functions in high-growth global organizations in the hospitality, retail, technology, service, and advertising industries with world-renowned brands such as Starbucks, Levy Restaurants at Walt Disney World, and Marshall Fields. She has been a speaker at the Society of American Florists conventions, as well as being a monthly contributor to SAF's Floral Management magazine. Once Glenna is finished with her presentation, we will open the webinar up for questions. If you have a question, simply type it in the question box on the upper right side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions during the presentation, and we'll hold them until the Q&A portion of the webinar. So without further ado, I would like to turn the call over to Glenna to begin the webinar. Glenna?
Thank you. And welcome everyone to Hire Employees Every Day of Their Career. I'm sure you're excited about this topic, but you may be scratching your head and saying, if I hire them once, why do I have to hire them every single day of their career? Well, let me share with you a little bit about what we're going to be discussing as we go forward and the goals of our session. As a result of this session, you're going to learn about employee engagement, the interview process, the team success model, completing necessary paperwork, stages of the team, the role of the manager, and then 3 key takeaways. What is it that you could implement immediately upon leaving this session? So let's get started, and let me share a question with you, and that is, if you are hiring employees every day of their career, and they were happy, they were excited, they were exuberant, and they were thrilled to be working with you in your business, you might say that they were engaged employees. That's kind of a hot buzzword right now. And so a lot of folks ask the question, well, what does that really mean? What is employee engagement? And more importantly, how do I know whether or not the employees that work for me are actually engaged? So here's the definition of employee engagement. It's the state by which individuals are emotionally and intellectually committed to the organization. Let's take a look at 2 of the words that are in that definition, emotionally and intellectually. And I think we would all agree, particularly in a business such as yours, that people are tied to your organization by what they do, but also through their heart, that they like the people they work with. They like working with you. They represent your organization well. They feel tied to your outcome, your customers, the things that you're trying to achieve. And you may say, those are the people that I know that are truly engaged. But here's some ways to look at that that might be easy for you to measure. And so I'm going to share with you the 3 points that are below. Engaged employees say certain things, they stay, and they strive. Well, what do we mean by say? Well, they're consistently speaking positively about the organization, even when you're not prompting them. So when you are hearing them talk to customers and they say, what's it really like working for the company? They say positive things, and they speak from the heart. They share those things that are not canned or statements that might have been prepared. They speak with their emotion and talk about what it's like to work in the organization. And they stay. They have an intense desire to be a member of the organization. Even though I think we would all admit, everyone now has opportunities to go elsewhere. They have other places that may be calling them. They have other locations that are in your neighborhood, around the block, in your city. But regardless of the phone calls they're getting, they're still really excited to work for you. And they have an intense desire to stay with you. But they also strive. You know who I mean by this. These are the people that exhibit behaviors that contribute to the business success. They go over and above. You might refer to them as your rock stars. You may say they're the people that no matter what, always show up. You can depend on them. They have your back. They have each other's back, and that you know that they are really here for the long haul. That's how we're going to define engagement. So when we talk about hiring people every day of their career, our ultimate goal is that we want an outcome that includes engaged employees. Well, is everyone an engaged employee? And the answer to that is probably not. As you'll see on the next slide, there really are three types of employees, levels of employee engagement. We already started to talk about the very top level, which is an engaged employee. They work with passion, feel a profound connection to the company, and they drive innovation and move the organization forward. They have energy, they have passion, they come up with ideas, and they may always be saying to you, have you ever thought of this? Even though it may not be their job. On the other end of the spectrum, we have people that are actively disengaged employees. These just aren't people that are unhappy. They're the people that act out their unhappiness. Every day, they undermine what their engaged coworkers accomplish. We might refer to them as a little toxic in terms of employees. They're people that go around and openly talk about how unhappy they may be at work, how unhappy they may be in their life. Boy, if I found something else, I probably would go. And they're employees that you may say to yourself, oh boy, I hope that today they're going to come in and say, you know, I found something else to do. And then there's the middle group. Those are people that are not engaged employees. They're essentially checked out. They go through the motions, they're sleepwalking through their day, and they're putting time, not energy or passion, into their work. So let's talk about how these people might break out in a bell curve. If you were to look at this on a curve, you would see that it's 20, 60, 20. 20% of your employees are actively disengaged. 20% of your employees are probably very much engaged. And usually that middle group of 60% are those that are going through their day-to-day. Now, if we were to also look at this on a performance evaluation, we might say that those not engaged employees are effective employees. They're doing the job, but they're not doing more than the job, just enough to keep them going. Here's the disconnect, and something profound that I'd like you to think about. And that is, even though 20% of our employees are actively disengaged, we spend an enormous amount of time with them. An actual recent research study spoke with CFOs and found that on average, managers spent 8 hours of each week dealing with actively disengaged employees. 20% of your time, one full day, with people that probably should leave your workforce. So if I was going to share with you where I would focus energy, it would be on the not engaged employees, helping create a wow experience that actually moves them up to become engaged or down to say, you know, maybe this isn't the right place for me. But during the course of our conversation, we're going to be focusing on how do we move that middle group up and how do we continue to create a great experience for people that allows them to say wow and have a profound, passionate connection to your organization. And where does that start? Well, it starts exactly where you think it would start, and that is with the interview process. So let's spend a moment now and we're going to talk about that. Let's look at the next slide. So the interview process, if we were to take a look, you may say to yourself, what's the correlation between great hiring and great performance, or great hiring and engagement? Let me share with you some statistics that I think you will find very, very interesting. When you look at the next slide, you'll see some percentages that would have a significant impact on your business. When we ask ourselves the question, well, why is the interview so important? Because the outcome of hiring a great employee can have profound impact on your company. Take a look at these percentages, and this is a study from McKinsey, a very, very well-known, well-renowned consulting and research firm. McKinsey has said that there's 40% increased productivity from operations high performers. Has anyone on the call ever worked with a person who's got a lot of energy? I'm sure many of you have. And if they're like me, I get a lot done in a day. And because I tend to move more quickly, I have greater productivity. So when you hire a person that's energetic and passionate and engaged with life, they tend to accomplish more in your workforce. They tend to accomplish more in their day-to-day activities. And McKinsey actually found that it was as much as 40% increased productivity. Now look at the next bullet. 40% increased profitability from management high performers. Now that one is a very interesting thought. And you may say, why is that the profits really are impacted? Because people that are engaged managers never stop thinking about the next great idea. They're never satisfied. Even though things are great, they're always the person that says, how can I make it better? How can I improve the company? How can I improve the experience for our employees? How can I improve the experience for our customers? And they're always coming up with something new and interesting and enticing. And that because of their continual focus on the business, they're constantly introducing things, and profitability and revenue continues to go up as much as 40%. So how many of you out there would love to have an increased bottom line of 40%? I bet every hand on this call is going up. And then look at the last bullet. 67% increased revenue from sales high performers. Well, I'll be honest with you. When I saw this one, what I initially thought of was they're selling high-ticket items, high-end computers, things that are very, very expensive. And then I remembered back to my own history. When I was working at Starbucks, I had an opportunity to work with people that knew every regular that came in the door. So when they saw somebody walking towards the door and they knew that person had a special drink or a special pastry, they had it ready for them by the time they hit the register. Because of their focus on sales and getting to know their customers and service overall, there was greater throughput in our environment. And we could actually calculate that they had increased revenue because of that service and recognition and their passion and engagement. So again, if you look at those two bullets, if you were able to increase your profitability, your flow through bottom line, and your top line revenue, just because you hired people who were exceptional and engaged, wouldn't you want to know how to create that over and over and over and over again? Well, here's some ideas that I think will help you out. So let's take a look at the next slide. Because something that you need to think about is you really do never get a second chance to make a first impression. When I come into your organization for an interview, I don't get a do-over. I walk in and I experience what I experience. Some days it's great, other days it may not be. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about how you would describe your first impression that you create with a candidate when they come in to interview with you. And think about that, and you actually may want to jot a note down for yourself that says, it's great, it could use some work, maybe I need to do this, maybe I need to do that. But the reality is, if it's not, oh wow, as you see on the next slide, and if it doesn't create fireworks for people, and someone down the block does, then I may have the idea that it's going to be a better opportunity for me to go to this other location. Because when it's a firework in my interview, I'm making the assumption it's going to be a firework every day of my career with somebody. So how do you create that? What do you do? What are some things that set you apart? This is the number one. Treat your talent, your interviews, as customers. So I want you to think for a moment. When you know that you're getting ready to open the door in the morning, and you know that your customers are going to come in, there are certain things that you do to get prepared. You want it to be perfect. You want it to be exactly what they expect when they see it on a website, or read it about it on Yelp, or think about or hear about the reference from somebody else about your business. You take those customers very, very seriously and prepare your experience for them. Well, if you treated your candidates like customers, you may do some things differently. You may take that interview a little bit more seriously. You may have your managers take that a little bit more seriously and say to them, remember, we may not hire every person that comes in the door, but they're going to walk out and share their experience of interviewing with many other people. If it's a fabulous interview experience, then they're going to share that, and then people will come to us, whether it's as an employee or as a customer. But on the other hand, if it's not as wonderful an experience, they're going to share that too. So here's some tips that I think you will find valuable when we talk about the interview process. If I was interviewing as though someone were a candidate and a customer, here's some points that I would follow. Number one, I would know exactly what I was looking for. I would communicate the role. What are the job behaviors? What are the duties? What are the expected and acceptable behaviors? And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. What's the career path from this role? If I come in, I'm expecting that perhaps if I'm working with you for a period of time, I might move ahead, not only into a different job, but financially as well. Are you prepared to talk about that? And so thinking ahead, knowing that I am making a commitment to you as an employee and I'm giving you my gifts, what is it that I might get in return in my long-term investment? So you need to be prepared to discuss all of those things when somebody walks in the door to speak with you. The next thing that you're going to want to do, and this is probably the most difficult one, is to give your full and undivided attention. It's easy to do when the organization or the shop or the business is a little bit quiet, but what if it's not? What if you're talking to an individual and all of a sudden a number of customers come in? How are you going to remove yourself from that interview for just a moment and deal with the situation so that you can go back and give your undivided attention? Where would you interview to set yourself up so that you're not distracted? Making sure that you communicate to the people that are interviewing for you that the most important person in front of them right at that point in time is the candidate. Because again, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And when you're not fully focused on the candidate, you may not be hearing those cues that tell you they're not the right person for the job. So let's say you interview an individual and you know that you typically would spend 20 minutes or so in the interview, but very quickly you determine they're not right for you. Let's say that happens in the first 4 or 5 minutes. What do you do then? Well, the next point is significantly important. You need to spend time even if they're not the right person for the job. Why? Because they're a customer. And if they are giving you the gift of their time, they've come there, they may have driven there, taken a bus there, they may have left another job to come early and interview with you or reshuffled a schedule. Whatever they did to get there, they gave you their time. And because of that, we need to give them our time as well. And so if an interview is typically 20 minutes, you need to give them the full and complete time to interview. Here's another reason why. Sometimes people are nervous. I've interviewed candidates that in the first couple of minutes just aren't great. They're nervous, they're queasy, they can't put their sentences together, and I think in my head, boy, I know that they're probably not right for me. And then all of a sudden they get their stride and they get confidence and they become exceptional, strong candidates during the early to middle to later part of the interview. So what I've learned in an interview process is I spend time in the beginning and then validate my first assumptions throughout the course of the interview, which is why it's important to spend the entire time while you're talking to them. The next point here is to recruit versus interview. Sell your brand and the uniqueness of your company. What do you offer? What do you offer relative to benefits? What do you offer relative to community service? Giving back in the community that you're in. Talk a little bit about the public relations, the history, the mission. What do you stand for in your brand? Remember, I have choices as a candidate now, and I may go down the street and hear other things that your people or you may not be sharing. And the key here is recruiting is enticing somebody and inspiring someone to come and work for you. It's not just you making the decision, it's the candidate making the decision. And that's why recruiting is very important. Give them a sample. Now you may say, what does that mean? Well, I remember when I was at Starbucks, we would give them a cup of coffee. And we would sit over coffee and talk to them. Watch how they enjoyed it. You have the most beautiful samples in the world. You have flowers. And flowers make people happy. They create a response. They create an emotional reaction. And so giving them a sample of your product not only shares with them what it is that you do that's unique, but it also starts to create an emotional connection. And you can watch their response to that. If they're filled with joy, when they receive that, then you know that that's how they're going to be every day that they're working with you. If it's just a thank you, but it's a flower, then you know that this is not the person who's going to be in that top tier of engaged employees. They may just be going through the motions of an interview, and they're not somebody that you would find would be a brand ambassador for you. So are there other ideas of things that perhaps you would do that would be beneficial for you to reinforce a candidate as a customer? Any other ideas? You might choose to jot them down now. But let's go on. So here's something to remember. Great vision without great people is irrelevant. Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great. And as a business owner, oftentimes we spend a lot of our time on our systems, on our process, on our strategy, on our public relations. But we have to remember that without somebody who is an employee that's engaged and excited, all of those feel flat, and they don't feel as though they have the excitement for the person on the other end. I'm sure many of you have gone to a restaurant where you've had an okay meal with a great server and you went back. On the other side, you might have had a great meal with a server who wasn't very excited, not very attentive, made you feel as though you were an afterthought, and you said, you know what, I'm going to vote with my dollars, and I'm certain there's somebody else out there who's going to be a great meal and a great server, and I think I'll go elsewhere in the future. So great people make all the difference in whether or not your customers are engaged with your business. Again, looking at hiring people every day of their career. So now let's assume that we've gone through an interview, we've hired a great person, and now it's time to move forward. So it's the first day, and we have to do onboarding. And this requires that there's some planning on your part. I'm sure you've had days where people have started with your business and it's an easier day for them to start. It's not as busy. You've got a lot of time to spend with them, and you can give them the lay of the land. You can tell them all about your organization. And then there's other times, like right now, where it's in the middle of the season, you're very, very busy, and you say, I just want to bring somebody in and have them jump in, do their job, lend a hand, and start with me. Well, I think you need to back up and say to yourself, what is going to continue to create that wow experience that they had during the interview? So I really want you to think about two things. And again, this is an opportunity for you to do some personal reflection on your business. Question number one is, what is your goal for their first day of work? And it may be to meet their team members. It may be to get comfortable. It may be to learn some basics about your organization and their job. But to be very clear about the goal for their first day so that you can share that when they come in. And then the second question is, so how do you create this experience in your organization that says, wow? And if you were to look at people in your company that have had a wow experience when they came in and said, oh my gosh, this is an amazing place to be, they are probably people that are more at the top of that chart as engaged employees. When somebody comes in and they're thrown in the deep end, it may be what needs to happen in the business, but it doesn't make me feel special or necessarily passionate or cared for. And so we want to make sure that as often as possible, we can create the experience that mirrors exactly what happened in the interview, so the candidate knows that they've made the great choice and one that will continue for a long period of time. So here's some things to think about. The first day, wow. First off, personally greet the new employee at the door. If you can do that, is to be there when you say, come here at 8 o'clock in the morning. Be there to welcome them. So glad you're here. Excited you took the job. Thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to meet you. Here's the things that we have going on during the course of the day. If you can't be the person who's there when they walk in the door, identify an advocate that's going to create a welcoming experience for them. One of the things that many organizations do is they put up a welcome sign, and the sign has the employee's name on it and says, welcome to XYZ organization. Glenna, we're glad you're here. I feel special. I feel as though there's been some thought and anticipation and some planning. When you walk the person in your location, make a point to introduce them to all of their co-workers. Stop, welcome them, introduce them. Leslie, this is Glenna. Glenna, this is Leslie. This is what Leslie does. That way, not only are you making the new person feel special, you're acknowledging all the people that are currently there. The next two are very, very significant, and these are different people in your organization. One that you're going to need to identify is somebody that I would call an onboarding ambassador. This might be a person who has this role repeatedly. They're your engaged employee. They're excited about the organization. They are absolutely a brand ambassador, love your customers, love your product, and they would be able to very clearly and easily transition the new employee to your organization and your culture. They'll explain the things that this person needs to know. Basic things. So sometimes it's important to say to somebody, here's where the restrooms are. Here's where you hang your coat. Here's where we have information about a time clock. Here's where you might go to have your lunch. Here's where we have a communication board. This is what we do when we have new policies, and this is where we share them. This is the most important thing that we do. So again, very general information, but extremely important information. That's your onboarding ambassador. The second person that you would introduce them to is what I would call a mentor to teach job functions. So a mentor is somebody that might have the same role or have had the same role that can answer those questions that I certainly have about what it is that I do. Where do I get something? If I run out of something, if I have a question about an order, who should I go to? So a person that can teach me the mechanics about what we do. So you may say to yourself, can they be the same person? Certainly, if it's applicable, absolutely it can be the same person. But the onboarding ambassador is usually that cheerleader that gives the basic information. They may also be the person that has lunch with your new employee on their first day. And so someone that can make them feel very, very welcome. I always share the story about why is this important. And I'll tell you a very funny story. In my last corporate job, I was hired as the Vice President of Human Resources and Administration for an organization. And I started with the company and went through my onboarding. And here I am in HR, and I'm responsible for this stuff. And the third day with the company, my boss, who was the CEO, was standing at the door of my office with security. Not a good sign. So I looked at them, and they looked at me, and their first question was, why are you parking in our customer parking lot, our visitor parking lot? And I said to them, well, I didn't know that there was another place to park. And they said, sure, you have to go into employee parking. So I said, well, where is that? And they said, it's under the building. And I said, how do you get there? And they kind of shook their head and looked at me and rolled their eyes a little bit and said, well, it's under the building. Well, how do I get in? And they said, you know, your ID card, when you go to the gate, you swipe your ID card and the little gate door opens up and you can drive in. So of course I looked at them and said, where do I get my ID card? They then shook their head again and said, you're the head of HR, fix it. So here's the point. I was responsible for that, which is apparently why I was brought on board. But more importantly, that could have set me off on the wrong foot and made me feel as though I wasn't really doing a very good job looking up and seeing my boss and security standing at the door. So my vow was that those really simple things that make a difference are the ones that the onboarding ambassador can help to make easier for the person coming in the organization. Clearly communicate topics that impact team success. And then we're going to go through those in just a minute. And then finally, consider some onboarding software that might be available through an electronic payroll company to take the drudge out of your new hire paperwork. So let's go on. What do I mean by the team success? So here's a model that I'd like to share with you very quickly. And this is all information that needs to be shared within the first days of somebody coming into the organization. It starts at the 12 o'clock point, which says Company Code of Honor, Mission, and Expected Behaviors, and it moves around to the right as a clock. And each of these points needs to be introduced in order to have success on your team. And success on your team deals with the individual. So let me share these points with you very easily, and then I'll do a deeper dive into the top one in just a moment. So the Company Code of Honor, Mission, and Expected Behaviors. A mission is, what are we trying to accomplish? The Code of Honor, which I'm going to describe to you in a minute, is what are those things that are the non-negotiables? When we get busy and it hits the fan and we're in the middle of the holiday, what are the things that I have to make sure that I always do? That's what it looks like when it's in the foxhole. And expected behaviors are those things that we say every employee in the company has to behave in this manner. But when it comes to my own job, the right side of this chart is absolutely critical. And that is, what are my job responsibilities? The mentor can help with it. That would be my job description, but it is, what am I actually supposed to be doing? And what's the training that I'm going to get to be able to do it? Certainly my mentor will give me some, but it may be beyond that. It might be, if I'm a customer service person, I have to spend a week or so in training learning how to put in an order. I may have to learn how to use a system. I may have to go to training. I may have to go out into a location and learn how a retail operation works. I may have to drive with a driver to understand how deliveries work. So what's the specific training that I'm going to go through, and what's the schedule for that? Accountability and level of authority are critical to my success. And let me define them this way. Accountability is, what am I ultimately responsible for? Or in other words, if I don't do this, you'll be upset. And that tells you how you'll measure my performance. And level of authority is, what is it that I'm not allowed to do? Said another way, if I do this, you'll get upset. So sometimes I go above and beyond my level of authority, and I make a decision that impacts the financials of the company or customer service, and you shake your head and say, you weren't supposed to do that. Well, sometimes that comment is a result of us not being clear about what we can and cannot do. So anytime you bring an employee in and anytime you develop a role, you have to identify what are the accountabilities for my job and what is it that is the ceiling, the boundaries that direct the level of authority. When you move to the left side of the chart, you'll notice that it says, what are the measurable outcomes and the things that you are going to hold me accountable to? And then finally, what are the incentives and rewards? Incentives are carrots. Those are things that I am going to receive if I do this, and rewards are those things that I actually receive. So an incentive may be, if you do this through the holidays, I'm going to give you a bonus. And a reward may be, you did those, you're going to get it. Or you didn't, and you're not. And so I need to have both the incentive and the reward, which is the outcome. But let me explain a little bit more about the Code of Honor, which is on the next slide. The company Code of Honor, the mission and the expected and acceptable behaviors might be things such as this. They may be a caring community. They may be acting with integrity, being adaptable, always being responsible, being service-oriented, having a focus on excellence. And I've given you an example on the next slide of what some of those Code of Honor statements might be. So if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see here's some points to consider. A Code of Honor might be, we do what we say we will do. We have each other's back. We make a difference in people's lives. We don't jump to conclusions. We ask questions before responding. We trust each other's motive. And a great behavior is we honor those who are not present, which is a nice way of saying we don't gossip about each other. If you don't tell me what it is that you expect I will do when the going gets tough and how you expect me to behave, I will bring with you my behaviors that I've been taught in my lifetime and in other jobs. And those may not be ones that are okay for you in this workplace. So one of the to-dos that I'm going to ask you to think about as we go forward in this webinar is to develop your own company Code of Honor and your expected and acceptable behaviors, and share that in your interview process. Let's move on. So how do you complete necessary paperwork, and what is necessary? If you look at the next slide, I boiled it down for you in terms of the paperwork that's required. you need to have an I-9 form completed within the first 3 days. And that's a whole nother seminar in itself and is being updated at the end of January. The W-4 form for not only your federal and state, a direct deposit form if that's something that you have, a work comp notification for your state, what it is that you do if somebody gets hurt, and then depending on the size of your organization, you may have benefit information. It could be health and wellness, it could be a 401k, it could be time away from work, but certainly the health and wellness is required under the Affordable Care Act for some of the companies that may be listening to this webinar. And those are the things that are required. Other companies give handbooks. And some people say, well, is that required? Not necessarily. But why is it important? It communicates your standards and your policies. Traditionally, it includes your code of conduct and your expected behaviors. It also offers guidelines for the employee in how to behave. And finally, it protects the company in unemployment and litigation. I would always recommend that an organization develop and have a handbook. Let's take a look at the next slide, however, which is the phases of a team. So let's say that you have interviewed me, you've hired me, and now you've brought me in. You've done a great wow job on my onboarding. You implemented all of the things we've just discussed. You've introduced a code of conduct. You have an onboarding ombudsman. You have a mentor. And now I'm working in my team location. Maybe I'm a driver. Maybe I'm working in retail. Maybe I'm taking orders in sales. And you need to know that no matter what, every team, the large team and the small team, goes through 5 phases. It starts at the bottom right with forming, goes to storming, then norming, performing, and reforming. Okay, so now you're saying, what are all of these stages? Well, let me share them with you pictorially, and I'll explain what those mean. Forming. Forming is the stage where everyone plays nice with each other. And it's always, hi, I'm Glenna. This is a little bit about me. And everybody is saying, oh, you know, you're from such and so. Where did you go to school? Great, I went to school there as well. Oh, you used to work here? I know someone there. And everyone's playing nice with each other. They're getting to know each other. And really what's going on in the forming phase is they're sizing each other up. They're seeing, are you competition? Can I work with you? Do we have the same roles and responsibilities? Are you going to be better than I am? Am I going to be better than you are? And everybody always goes through this kind of nice phase, if you will. And then the next phase is storming. And you'll see through this cartoon Snow White and the 7 concerned trolls. And you'll see the trolls are saying, yeah, don't you be too hard on the queen. We're on your side, Snow. Maybe you should try hanging out. And you'll notice that she's very frustrated. Well, this is the time when factions start forming. And people may say, you know, I'm not sure I'm so crazy about that new person. Or some will say, you know, I really like that new person. Here's the key. The storming phase always occurs. Some companies have it go very quickly. And I've also worked with companies where departments will say, we've been in storming for years. The control of this phase lies directly in the hands of the manager, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And the sooner you bring people back to the code of conduct, back to the mission, back to the acceptable behaviors, the sooner you will basically bring them to the point where you say, this is not acceptable behavior, and we need to get to it and make sure that we understand our vision is to have engaged employees, brand ambassadors, and engaged customers. And when you start laying that groundwork for what is expected and what you want and desire, then you move to the next phase, which is you'll see that people start working together and norming. They put their heads together. They may not like each other, but they're starting to work more cohesively as a team. And eventually, there's the point where they start to rock and roll. And you'll notice in the next slide, they're all jumping up, they're excited, the team is performing, and they are thrilled and giving each other high fives. This is the time when you celebrate. This is the time when you do the reward phase. This is the time when you acknowledge the team. And you may say to yourself, oh my gosh, I wish this could go on forever. But sometimes it doesn't. And what happens is the next phase occurs, which is reforming. Reforming is somebody gives notice. Somebody takes a promotion. Somebody falls in love and moves to another city. Someone leaves and takes another job. You make a decision that you're going to bring in another supervisor. Here's the bottom line. When something changes on the team, reforming goes on. And a lot of people think that when you hire a person, they just fit in the same slot that the other individual did. That's not true. The organization always goes through all 5 phases of the team. How do you engage people? You hire them every day of their career. You create a wow experience. You continue to talk about your code of honor and your roles and your accountabilities and your areas that you're going to measure and your rewards and incentives. You continue to go back to the things that we've discussed thus far to move them quickly through the phases so that you're not having people that are doing things that are counterintuitive to the success of your business. But let's take a look at the next slide, which is, what's the role of the manager in all of this? And when you look at the next model, you're going to see there's all of these arrows that go in different directions. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that when I come in as a new employee in onboarding, no matter what my experience is, you always start with your role as an instructor, the bottom right. This moves from instructor to coach, over to the left to facilitate and mentor. An instructor is somebody who is guiding, standing in front. It could be the mentor in the department, or your role as a mentor as a manager. You are instructing them in their job. You're giving them information about your company. And let me give you an example. Let's say I've been in human resources for years. I know HR really, really well. But if I came to work with you, I don't know your business. So your policies may be different. Your mode of operation may be different. Your work week days may be different. So even though I know my craft, I don't know your business. So you have to instruct me in your business. And once I start to get my feet on the ground, then you can act as a coach and stand next to me and partner with me so that I can start to stand on my own 2 feet. Once I start taking the ball and moving with it, facilitating is saying, I'm available to answer questions for you, and mentoring is, you got the hang of it, so I'm here for you if you need me. Now you may scratch your head and say, what are all those funny arrows that are going on in the middle? Well, my role as a manager never stops. Even though I may be your best salesperson, let's say you give me another duty that I've never done before. You now have to go right back to instruct and to give people the nuts and bolts of their job. Where we often fail and have people disengaged is we assume that how they do anything is how they do everything in their job. And that can work for you and against you. So sometimes when someone's getting it and they're a rock star, but we give them a new duty, we give them no coaching, and they have to figure it out on their own. And that can be very frustrating. On the other side, sometimes when someone is independent, we may say to them, or not independent, we may say to them, we're going to micromanage you. And that's what we do forever in their career. So again, take a look at the individuals on your team and say, how do I engage them? and hire them every day of their career, I know where I have to play with them given the roles of their job, and that's a significant place to be. So as we look at the next slide, what you're going to see is you have 3 key takeaways. I was asked when I spoke at the most recent SAF convention, you give us a lot of great information, but can you boil it down to a couple of things that if we were to just do those, we'd be in great shape? So here you go. These are the 3. Number 1, I would say right now, develop your code of conduct, your mission, and your expected and acceptable standards of behavior. How do you do that? You basically say to yourself, if we were in DEF CON and I needed people to do certain things, it's right before Valentine's Day, and they need to do these things to make sure we get through it. What are those? And maybe there are 3 or 4. Not 104, but 3 or 4. And if you had employees that did those, you'd be very happy. Your mission is your long-term goal for the organization. And your expected and acceptable standards of behavior are how you want people to be with each other and with your customers. You may want to say the second point is to treat candidates like customers. The next interview that you have, what are you going to do differently? What are you going to do to honor the people coming in, knowing that they're going to go out and tell everyone all about their experience with you? And how might you implement some of the things that we've discussed to create a wow experience? And the third one is understand the phases of the team and celebrate. You're not broken. Every team and every company goes through forming, storming, norming, performing, and reforming. You can't skip them, but you can speed them up. So the question is, how do I move them along? And that's by having a well thought out point number 1, your code of conduct. But remember, when people start to get to the norming and performing stage, celebrate, acknowledge, reward, give high fives, thank people, use opportunities to congratulate the team for working together. Next, we're going to ask if any of you have any questions. If you do, please feel free. You can always email me. My email is included here, and my website is glennahecht.com. But does anyone have any questions now that you'd like to ask?
Glenna, thank you so much for sharing a lot of great information with us today. We are now open, as she mentioned, for questions. So if you have a question, simply type it in that question box on the upper right side of your screen. We do have a question from Josh. He said, what do I do when I have an employee who is actively disengaged?
Excellent. Well, Josh, thank you first off for having courage about asking that question, because some people think that they're stuck. Here's the key. If you have somebody who is actively disengaged, and that's probably a very well fleshed out another webinar that we have to have, but you need to deal with them. You need to take a look at the behaviors that they're doing and start to move them out of your system, because what happens is those actively disengaged people pull down the rest of your team. And the team sees behaviors that are allowed to go on, and they scratch their head and say, why is this happening in our environment? So what I would say to you is it's time to start dealing with the people who are not serving your organization, your customers, and your employees with the level of respect that you want them to have, and to deal with that accordingly and to move them out of your organization. And that certainly is something that I can always assist you with in a more one-on-one conversation. But thanks, Josh, and good luck with that one. Any other questions?
It doesn't look like we have any other questions at the time. You did a fantastic job of explaining and sharing a lot of information. So I know we're getting towards late hour, so your email address is up there. And we'll just say if anybody has any questions that they come up with after, please feel free to email Glenna at glennahecht.com. And I just want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. If you missed a portion of the webinar, you want to review it again, we will have a replay available at FTD University Online later this week. The webinar materials are always available if you go to ftdi.com, click on that FTD University logo, and click through to the webinar series page. As always, we will be sending you a very brief survey to gather your feedback on today's webinar. We'd ask you to please just take a minute to complete the survey and help us improve future webinars and other education programs for you. The next FTD webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, February 28th. Mark Goulet, Vice President of Client Development for Russell Research, is going to share generational attitudes, knowledge, and purchase behavior within that floral category with the goal of helping you create a multi-generational marketing approach. The registration will be available at ftdi.com in the coming weeks, so please be sure to register as soon as possible to reserve your spot. Again, we just want to thank you, Glenna, for sharing a lot of great information on how to create an experience for new employees that is memorable. This concludes FTD's webinar, Hire Employees Every Day of Their Career. Thank you, everyone.